Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going through 1.4 and 5. Now, I did take a bit of a hiatus, if you will. It was mostly because I was doing my mocks and I was really stressed, but I'm back now and I am planning on really pumping out videos now right before the exams start, because obviously you're not really going to need them after exams, or I mean future students might use these videos as well, so good luck to you, whichever year it may be. Again, I am no teacher. I just use the book and my notes that I've gotten in class, and let's get right into it. So, this chapter, I don't know why I wrote 1.1. This is 1.4, but yes, it is all about stakeholders. So, what are stakeholders? Stakeholders are any individual or group that has a direct interest in the business because any action taken by the business will affect them directly. So there are internal stakeholders, which we'll get into, but these are people working in the business, and then there are external stakeholders. These are people that are not inside of the business but are still affected by the business. This could be bigger things like the community and stuff like that, but we'll get into it very soon. So examples of internal stakeholders and what their interests are. So first there is a shareholder. This is someone who owns shares of a business. So what they focus on is what the return on their investments will be. So if they buy a share for $1, they want those shares to become more valuable so that when they sell them eventually they can get more than $1 back. Then there's the CEO or the owner. Obviously, they want profit as well, but their job is also to coordinate and build business strategy and control the business, stuff like that. Managers, of course, they're doing their managing thing. They're planning, they're organizing, they're commanding, controlling, and coordinating. Then there is the employees. So they focus on protecting their rights and working conditions, and obviously they want a higher salary, they want stuff like that. So these are all what the people inside of the business wants. Now let's talk about external stakeholders. So the first one is the government. They're not a part of the business, they're external, but they still want something from the business. They want taxes and stuff like that. Suppliers, they obviously want to have a stable relationship with the business so that the business keeps buying from them. Customers and consumers, obviously, they want the best products they can possibly get, and they might want a variety of products and so on and so forth. So they are obviously stakeholders into the business, because if your favorite toothbrush company stops selling toothbrushes, then what are you going to do? You know what I mean? You care, of course. Then there is the local community. Obviously, if your factories are making a lot of noise pollution, then the people in the local community will be impacted and they'll probably be annoyed because they don't want a bunch of weird noises in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? They're just trying to live their lives. Then there are financiers. So when they say financer, I mean, for instance, like banks and stuff like that. And they, just like how a shareholder would, they focus on the returns on their investments. Then there are pressure groups. They focus on how the business has impacted whatever area of concern they have. For instance, if they care about the environment and you are polluting the air, then obviously they're going to be very mad with you. And whatever the business does, well, it keeps polluting. So obviously that affects their cause, which is to be better, more environmentally sustainable. Then there is the media, which basically focuses on the impact of the business in terms of news stories. So the media wants businesses to mess up, so that they can get more stories and more people reading those stories because the stories are more interesting and thus they can get more money. As you can probably guess by what I said, if you're asked a question about what stakeholders want and you can't think of anything to answer, then start thinking about where money belongs in the situation. That's the easiest way to think about it. Oh, who wants money and who gets money if you do this? Who gets money if you do that? So even though you don't have to talk about finance, finance would probably be the easiest way to answer a question about why stakeholders want what they want. So gray areas when you're talking about stakeholders is basically the when a stakeholder is both internal and external. So for instance, if you're an employee of a business that lives in the community where the business is located, then you are technically both an internal and an external stakeholder. Another thing to think about are what are the mutual benefits and conflicts between internal and external stakeholders, or any stakeholder for that matter. So the example they use in the book is very good, so I will be explaining it here. If you have a pay raise for employees, certain stakeholders will be happy and certain stakeholders will be sad. So the happy ones will be the employees, they get more money, yay, they're probably more motivated, which helps the business in general. That's really great. However, shareholders might not be happy because if you're adding a pay raise for employees, then some of your profits will be used for that, which means you get less profits, which means that your shares will likely be less worth, and you might not get as much dividends as you would before, which dividends are what you pay out to your shareholders at the end of the year. Like every year you can pay out dividends just to sort of give them a thank you for investing and believing in us. So when you're talking about any decision that will be made in a business or any change made in a business, then it's really important to remember that different stakeholders will react differently. So it's really important to mention before we move on that competitors were not mentioned as external stakeholders or internal stakeholders. The reason for this is that in IB Business Management, the effect our business has on a competitor is seen as indirect instead of direct, because usually your competitors want you to fail. Meanwhile, the other stakeholders, they want you to succeed, or they want you to do something that you want them to do. For instance, the pressure groups, they don't want them to fail, but they also don't want them to continue the way they're doing. Meanwhile, a competitor will want them to fail no matter what. So businesses, usually bigger businesses, will start having to think about who to prioritize when it comes to stakeholders. Who should they pay most attention to? So there are different ways to figure this out. So first there's a stakeholder analysis. I will be showing an example of this. So one way of thinking about it is who is the closest to the business, and whichever stakeholder is the closest to the business and can make the most decisions within the business are the most important, then the business should focus on those stakeholders to keep those stakeholders satisfied. So if I take the stakeholder examples I mentioned before and I put them in this diagram, in the middle circle it would be owners and managers because they have the most control over the business. Then in the pink circle, or the middle circle, there would be employees, suppliers, financiers, and customers because they also impact the business quite directly and they can make some decisions. Then in the final circle, there would be the local community, government, media, and pressure groups. Because yes, they have an impact on the business, but they're not that important. They don't make direct decisions. I mean, I guess the government could, but but it's still an external stakeholder, so therefore it's in the outer ring. Now, another thing you could do, or another tool you could use to decide who's the most important, is stakeholder mapping. So there are different versions of this, but we're going to use the one by Johansson and Scholes. I'm probably saying that wrong, but basically it's the power interest model. That's what it's called. So you take the level of interest versus the degree of power and you make a matrix. A matrix is any model with the squares. So if you're making a matrix, you're making a model that has rectangles or squares in it. So you'll have the ones that have low levels of interest and a low degree of power. They're group A. You put minimal effort into these people. They have minimal interest in the business and they have limited power of it. So they are rarely a problem for the business. Owners and managers fairly safely ignore these stakeholders, or at least they don't put a lot of energy into them because you don't really have to satisfy them because they don't care and they can't control you. So that's that. Then there are the people with low degree of power but a high level of interest. This is group B. Basically, for this group, you keep them informed. You want to make them feel included, so you can have little events for them, but they technically don't have a lot of power, so they can't really do anything, but because they're interested and you want to show that You like the fact that people are interested in your business, so you keep them informed. Then there are the people with high degree of power but low degree of interest. Now, for these stakeholders, you have to keep them satisfied. You know, they don't really care that much. Their level of interest is very low, But they can influence a lot. So if you make them upset or something like that, then something really bad can happen. Because, before maybe they were just like some random person giving you money, for instance. But if you make them angry, then, that money will stop coming. Then the last group, which are the key players, they are the people with high degrees of power and high level of interest. Obviously, these are the most important. You have to communicate with them, but also ask them before you make any big decisions. These are people who have large power making things. Let's say like someone is a shareholder with like more than 50% of your shares, then obviously they can make most of the decisions. And if you don't listen to them, then you're going to be cut out of the business. I drew it a bit badly because I put the degrees of power on the wrong side. It's supposed to be like on the other side. I just didn't have space. Like where I wrote high and low, the degree of power is supposed to be there, but I didn't have space. But basically, if you go from like top to bottom and from left to right, well, actually, that depends on which way you're looking at this from. But anyway, from the way I drew it, if you go from left to right and from top to bottom, you go down the level of importance. So you have minimal effort, then keep informed, then keep satisfied, and then key players. Key players are the most important. Minimal effort are the least important. So now we are on 1.5, which is the external environment. Basically, this is a super short subtopic. It is all about STEEPLE. So STEEPLE is a tool you can use to evaluate the external environment to see if a business needs to change its objectives. So each letter of STEEPLE stands for a different type of influence. So there is social, technological, economic, ethical, political, legal, and ecological. So in social, there could be things like lifestyle or education, maybe the tastes of your customers, maybe demographics. Maybe you're in a country where suddenly there are more females than males, or suddenly more children are born, or whatever. Technological is pretty obvious, like new things are being invented, stuff like that. And economic, obviously, if there is a boom in the economy or a recession, you might have to change things. Ethical, if you are in a corrupt government or like with a corrupt government, maybe people think it's more important to treat your employees better. Things change like that. Political, obviously, if you have an election going on or something like that. Legal, there are regulations. Maybe there is labor laws, like how you pay your employees and stuff like that, which is also sort of ethical if you think about it. Ecological, obviously, we care more about the environment. You have to think about global warming and carbon footprints and all that stuff. Basically, if any of these things change, then you have to change your objectives. So let's say that your social influences change in the external environment, then you should change your objectives to match those, because you always want to match your customers. So that was everything for chapter 1.4 and 1.5. Please feel free to subscribe, like, and comment. I will be posting more frequently now, especially over the next 2 weeks. You can follow me at Johanna Frennert if you want to leave me a message or you just want to chat or something. I love getting to know you guys. For instance, I got to know someone called Vivan, and he's super sweet. And I mean, honestly, text me anything, send me anything, I'll answer. I love talking to all of you, especially if you're nice. Obviously, if you're not nice to me, then I'll block you. But yeah, anyway, feel free to text me or comment below. So goodbye. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something.